Hey, what's up? Gleb Alexandrov here. Welcome to the character lighting guide for Blender EEVEE. First off, huge thanks to Yo Onaina for the amazing character model, and to Amar Hivadi and Ahmed Nagib from Photon Town for the awesome little animation. This one was such a fun collab. The latest versions of Blender are absolutely incredible when it comes to rendering characters. Thanks to Vulkan and other advancements, it became possible to render hyper-realistic portraits in real time using EEVEE. And honestly, the results look production-ready and pretty stunning, making it a total joy to work with. So in this very exciting tutorial, I'll show you 4 cinematic character lighting setups representing 4 levels of complexity and how to set up and render each one in EEVEE. No matter if you're already familiar with EEVEE or have just started dipping your toes in with this render engine, you're definitely going to pick up some useful techniques. Level 1. Studio lighting. This entry-level setup involves just one light source and no backdrop. It is the most minimal setup possible, which certainly doesn't mean it's ineffective. In fact, it's super effective and is a fundamental skill worth knowing. A single light is often all you need to create a striking portrait. And it ties with the essential properties of light. We're starting here in the rendered mode using EEVEE. We'll spend some time in the render settings later in this video, but first, when working in a studio, you don't typically need the default ambient light, so you can switch it off completely. The simplest thing we can do really is just press Shift A and create an area light. Just one area light, a softbox basically. To make it behave in a physically accurate way, turn on the custom distance and set it to a high enough value. We can also make it nice and bright by increasing its wattage or power. To make the shadows more precise and realistic, turn on jitter in the light settings and also in the global render settings. Shadow jitter makes a big difference when you're working with soft area lights in EEVEE. Look how proper shadow appears under the nose and the chin and the eyelids in the right image where jitter is active. For small and sharp light sources like the sun, jitter is less critical though. It's mostly the softer lights that benefit most from jittering. I'll switch it off for now though, because it can sometimes flicker. Alright, now you need to decide where exactly to position this light and whether it should be larger or smaller, because that will affect its shadow. It's really simple. Larger lights cast softer shadows. Here is a bit of a comparison to help you with that concept. Now, not all light angles are created equal, except for perhaps the dead front angle, which flattens the image quite a lot. And usually it's not good. So what's a good angle for the main light? Essentially anything other than frontal. Any direction other than frontal is better from the standpoint of creating or sculpting the form. Even if this angle is just slightly above the model, it's already a massive improvement. So you can bring it slightly above like that, and it will immediately look pretty nice for a studio portrait. Incidentally, this is the exact lighting scheme that was used in the original render by Yo. See, you don't need much. Next, how close the light is to the subject also matters. If the light is very close like this, there's a dramatic light fall off. From here to here. It's almost like manually reducing the influence in the EEVEE light settings. When the light is close, you get a very similar effect. When light is further away, this difference in levels disappears. I want you to really look at this image and see that gradient of light to dark, which is looking totally different based on how close or far away is the light. That is called light fall-off, and usually having some fall-off is better than having completely uniform brightness. Well, maybe not as dramatic as in this demo, but you get the principle. When lighting for portraits and characters, there's one thing that can make or break the realism of the entire image, no matter where you place the lights, and that's subsurface scattering. This is the shaded property that allows the light to travel under the skin and illuminate it from within. Sounds gross, but it's a very nice effect. I'm going to hop over to the shader editor to demonstrate a few things there. First of all, here we can tweak the specularity or IOR level. With IOR 0, it's just gonna be the base color, so some specularity is a must-have for realistic lighting of characters. But then subsurface scattering is really important too. With the default settings, the characters might look a bit like resin, so I'll show you the settings that I typically use. What I'm going to do first is reduce the red, green and blue contributions. 0.02, 0.01. And then we are left with the scale, which is essentially a multiplier for this effect. It defines how far the light penetrates under the skin. But also there's the thickness output, often missed. I'm going to set it to a very low value, like 0.0 something, to make it look more like actual skin. Right, see how changing that value allows to fine-tune the scattering. It's pretty cool that we can do that in real time. And then the scale that we can tweak to hone in on the skin look. I just can't stop thinking about the fact that it all works in real time in EEVEE. Somebody wake me up. So here are the subsurface scattering settings that I ended up using. Now, as we've mentioned already, when using a softer light, shadow jittering is also vital. See how without it, some areas don't receive a proper shading, and these micro shadows are absolutely critical for realistic character portrait. Absolutely critical. Then turning on ray tracing should help to fill in the shadows a bit. It's a little bit hard to tell here, but there should now be a touch of light fill in the darker shadowed areas now. Alright, that is the first level of character lighting. One light, no backdrop, the most minimal setup ever, which can still look super effective, with the right model, that is. Now it's time to explore level 2, nature or HDRI. The second level will involve a full 360 degrees HDRI panorama of some nice location in South Africa, for example. The goal is to place the character within this location lighting-wise. See, it's already a little bit more involved, as you'll need to download an HDRI at least, from somewhere. And then peek into the EEVEE's ray tracing settings to get the soft and natural portrait lighting going. So it will be just a little bit more involved. This time I'll go straight to the shader editor, the World tab. Now I'll click the background node and press Ctrl T to set up the texture nodes automatically. Now you need to find that HDRI that you have downloaded from Polyhaven, for instance. I'll use the Forestberg Mountain Lookout 2, a beautiful spot in South Africa. Okay, now the character should be in this environment. It doesn't look great so far, but we'll fix that. First of all, it's blown out, so the strength should be much lower. Then right away, real-time ray tracing must be turned on. It will look better right away. Just look how it removes those weird light leaks behind the ears and stuff like that by simulating a proper occlusion. That's already a ton better. Next, you can spin that HDRI panorama on the Z-axis to find the best looking angle. For lighting the face. And again, I don't want it to be too fronty. I want the light to come in at an angle to create some shape and definition. And usually there are a lot of different ways to rotate the HDRI to achieve that. For instance, something like that looks pretty three-dimensional to me. Now I want to make just the background a bit less bright. More like the evening. When I simply reduce it from here, the background looks pretty nice, but the face is now just way too dark. So let me show you a different way. To be able to adjust these things separately, we need a mix shader first. To mix between two backgrounds. Okay. But then we'll need the light path node. Which, by the way, works in EEVEE at least partially. We need its is-camera ray inputs to mix between these two backgrounds. Ctrl H to minimize it like that. Now the first one will be just for the character lighting. So you can fine-tune it however you like. So you can make it weaker or stronger, whatever you wish really. It's just for the character. The second one will be just for the backdrop, so you can also fine-tune that however you like. For instance, to make it nice and muted, to make the character pop. You can do really cool stuff with that. TLDR, you can always tweak the levels of the character and the background independently. The left image is technically a physically correct result, but what matters most is the artistic or cinematic realism. So it's absolutely fine to cheat a little, like in the middle image. On the other hand, if you go too far with that, like in the right image, it may start to look a bit artificial, or as cinematographers say, it looks lit. When it comes to HDRI lighting in EEVEE, the render settings can make or break it. Our full EEVEE course is a deep dive into render settings, tips and secrets for HDRI lighting, and more. How realistic the EEVEE's HDRI lighting will look heavily depends on ray tracing and its settings. For better results, you can get rid of denoising, and that will add a lot of crispiness. Pay attention to the fine detail. Fast GI approximation can also be switched off. This one will be harder to spot, but there is a difference in precision. Maybe if we zoom in right down to pixels, you'll see the better contact shadows. See that? Or zooming in on the detail, see how it makes it look slightly more realistic. After that, it's a matter of maximizing the precision. Check the hair and the detail. And increasing the thickness. Notice the occluded areas now receiving a more natural shadow. The resolution here is the quality or fidelity of this effect. It affects primarily the indirect light. So if you set the samples to 1, it'll be immediately clear. So that is resolution, and it's better set higher for higher quality portraits, at least 1 to 2. Or better if your GPU allows to its maximum quality. The jittered shadows doesn't necessarily matter much in this HDRI setup, but they can matter under certain conditions. If in the sun tab of the world settings the jitter is also turned on and the sun threshold is low enough to actually create direct shadows from the brightest parts of the HDRI, which will be somewhere here by the way, then it could really matter. Notice how these shadows are actually flickering when I'm changing this value. It means they are jittered. But anyway, if the threshold is set high, there will be no direct shadows at all, and there will be nothing to jitter. Notice there's no flickering anymore. So that is something to keep in mind. Under certain conditions, jitter can still be pretty important, even in this setup. This was the second level of character lighting in EEVEE, natural HDRI lighting. The third level of character lighting is the on-location interior setup using double HDRI. It's more complex than the second one because the lighting will be completely decoupled from the backdrop in this technique, and it requires some fiddling to make it look right, but it's such an incredibly useful setup that we'll breeze right through it. We already know how to separate the actual environment lighting from background from the previous part, right? So it will be actually pretty straightforward. First, I'll set up the HDRI for the backdrop. The free workshop HDRI from Polyhaven, in fact. It's a pretty cool interior HDRI to set the mood and the location for the shot. Right now it's on a bright side, killing the mood, so I'll tone it down quite a bit. And then I'll start rotating it on the Z-axis to see what kind of composition we can get. You need to be patient with this. Okay, these lights are quite interesting, but maybe something like that would work. I'll roll the intensity back a bit. Okay, that looks great, like a warehouse or something. Imagine this as establishing the location. Next, I'll use one more HDRI for the actual lighting here. Control T to set up the nodes. Now I'll just plug in the new HDRI. The hangar interior, also from Polyhaven. What? I love Polyhaven. At the first glance, the question arises, why airplanes? How is this supposed to work with the previous one? What matters to me is that it has an amazing door over here, which will work as a key light, you know, nice and big light. So that second HDRI will be just for the lighting on the character. Your task as an artist is to find a good looking angle for it. You do it by changing the rotation of the HDRI. Remember, all angles are good except the frontal. Frontal angles often simply tend to be flat. I thought about some wordplay like flattening, not flattering, you know. Anyway, another task is to set the right softness. Remember, in the world settings there's the sun tab, the one with the shadow jitter and sun threshold. I want it to be super soft in this case, so I'll just input 45 there, and that will surely almost entirely remove the direct light. Obviously it's up to you whether you want the light from this HDRI be harsher or softer, but that's how you control that. Ultimately, after we get this double HDRI setup running, it's a matter of moving the light around, adjusting the levels of the backdrop and the character, and perhaps moving the lights again. It's all it takes, going back and forth. A quick tip, don't hesitate to use X and Y axis for rotating your HDRI environment. It can yield some pretty interesting results, like helping your model catch some nice reflections like the one here, or just an unexpected light direction. Like, look at that, it now turned into a really interesting parking lot lighting, slightly from below, a complete vibe shift. So that was the third difficulty level of setting up lighting for characters, the double HDRI technique for location shots. Now I hope you're well rested and hydrated, my friend, because there's the last fourth level upon us, the one that old-timers call full cinematic. By the way, it's not better than the previous three or anything like that, just more involved, using HDRIs to set the stage and mood, then cranking it up to 11 using the studio lights on top of that, resulting in a cinematic character portrait. For setting the stage, I'll use the vintage measuring lab HDRI from Polyhaven, which has really nice shapes and colors to it, and works great as a base motivation layer for the lighting setup I'm about to build. I'm gonna use the double HDRI trick for tilting the backdrop like that, straying away from the default orientation of it and giving a dynamic angle. Technically, we could also tweak the power of the first character HDRI separately from the backdrop if we wanted to, but I wouldn't bother. This time I'm going to set up the studio lights to create a moody, dramatic look, still motivated by the colors and values of this environment. First I will create a sun lamp, a pretty harsh and strong one. I want it to be a backlight to separate our character from the backdrop, a classical cinematic kicker, still motivated by the bright lights of the background plate. Next, I'll duplicate this light with Shift D and increase its angle to make it way softer and more wrappy. You know, so it wraps around the head like that, maybe off to the side a bit. Alright, now this light helps to sculpt a bit of the facial features, but mostly just wraps around the face a little bit. It is paramount to match the colors of these extra lights you set up to the environment, at least roughly. Green environment, greenish lights, or at least cold by temperature. Otherwise it may come across as artificial. For all the lights, for instance this one, it is looking okay, but I think it can still be matched a little closer, maybe to that tone marked with a red circle here. It may not seem like a big deal, but it looks a bit more from the same world when your lights match the backdrop. Compared to the previous three levels, this one has glasses, because glass is notoriously difficult in EEVEE. It's not even clear to begin with how to make it refract and reflect at the same time, you know? All kinds of questions. Fair enough, we definitely have a whole chapter dedicated to glass in this photoreal lighting and rendering course. And no, the inspirations for the visuals has absolutely nothing to do with my recent recycling bin. Now, to wrap that backlight around the face a bit more, I'll add another area light and make it more of a side light. I want to sculpt the face a bit more. Right away, as this light is pretty soft, I'm going to activate jitter. And as always, custom distance. I imagine that this is a bounce of that backlight, and I'm bouncing back that backlight from that direction. Again, the color can be matched to the environment colors. There's a lot of green there, so technically it won't be out of place, even if you go really bonkers with green. But I want it to be slightly more neutral, so I'll roll it back to this pale green. Now one more light from the other side. I think that will look great, as if the backlight bounces off some surface there and highlights that side of the face. Maybe it could bounce off something green, like a crocodile over there, and paints the face green from that direction. As long as you base these movie lighting choices on the environment, which is dictated by our HDRI, it won't feel out of place. Here's the progress so far. Set, ambient, movie lights. Sometimes they even add the eye lights in movies, a tiny detail that works wonders for adding emotion. An area light would be ideal. You know, you just place it a little bit further away. Take custom distance just in case. And I'm gonna place it really far out and try to capture that glint. Now the problem is that now the glasses also capture that glint, which by the way can be of different shapes. So what we can do is, with that light still selected, come over to the Object Properties tab, Shading, Light Linking. Click New to create a new light linking group and drag the eyes into it. That sounds gross. Now this light should only affect the eyeballs. See that tiny little glint? That's emotion. Here's before and after. Oh, by the way, if you don't want the whole eye to get brighter, just the glint, what you can do is kill the diffuse influence on that light. Or just leave it a little bit. Raw, the glasses, and the eye light. How can we elevate this even further? If I were you, I would add some haze. Maybe actually quite a lot of haze. My outie is a cinematographer and he is a very generous person when it comes to haze. But really, it works wonders for making the characters pop. As usual, we can just add a cube, set its visibility to bounce to not interfere with the viewport, then add any volume shader like principled volume, and greatly decrease the density. We just want it to be a subtle haze. It really does make characters stand out. If you want some extra visual punch, there are view transforms in Blender that have more pop in them than the default AGX, like Aces 2.0 or AGX High Contrast with a slightly increased exposure. Personally, I think Chronos PBR doesn't work that well for portraits and for realistic or photographic style at all, as it oversaturates the colors way too much. I'd rather choose a more classic aesthetic with the slightly desaturated highlights, like in these other view transforms. On this last level, you can also use the post-pro effects like real-time bloom to simulate how a real camera lens or human eye, for that matter, reacts to intense light. And to polish it up, maybe the film grain or sensor noise, anything that can add a touch of analog authenticity. Obviously, alongside the chromatic aberration to break digital perfection. Depth of field in EEVEE is amazing. Honestly, it's so good. You can experiment with a lower f-stop for a shallower depth of field, and a higher or lower ratio for simulating the vintage lens weirdness, or an anamorphic squeeze if you wish. This could be that final photographic touch to your EEVEE portrait for that fourth and the last level of EEVEE character lighting. To recap, in this tutorial we explored 4 cinematic character lighting setups representing 4 levels of difficulty, from a single light in a minimalist studio to a full-blown cinematic rig, all rendered in EEVEE. Now let's be clear, great character lighting doesn't have to be complicated. Each of these workflows can produce stunning results on its own. But if you're looking to level up your renders, these setups offer solid options for compelling character lighting in Blender. And now, thanks to Vulkan and other advancements, it's finally possible to render ultra-realistic portraits in real time. In EEVEE, what a time to be alive! This video wouldn't be possible without the incredible character model by Yo Onaina, a medical doctor, 3D artist and data scientist crafting stunning portraits in Blender. Animation was brought to life by the talented Omar Hebadi and Ahmed Naguib from Photon Town Studio, specializing in facial animation, and honestly they nailed it. Thank you so much to everyone involved, and thank you so much for watching!